Order!
Civil penalties equivalent reduction to customer bills.
The question is that new clause 3 be read a second time. Who wants to have a go at this new clause 3 before we were rudely interrupted this morning? I think it goes then to Minister.
I think it might be...
Minister Emma Hardy.
Thank you so much. And I thank the Honourable Member for Epping Forest for tabling new clause 3, which would require a water company to reduce customer bills by an equivalent amount to the total monetary penalties paid in the previous year by that company. I wish to start by clarifying that we expect the cost of the penalties to be borne by the companies and not by the customers. However, I would also like to reassure him that there are existing procedures in place to ensure customers are reimbursed for water company poor performance. As the independent economic regulator of the water industry, Ofwat are best placed to ensure customers are reimbursed appropriately if water companies perform poorly. Ofwat already sets specific performance targets for water companies in the 5-yearly price review. These performance commitments hold water companies to account for the outcomes that customers pay for. Where these are not met, companies must reimburse customers through lower water bills in the next financial year. These performance targets take a holistic view of water company performance and consider wider factors beyond companies receiving penalties. Performance targets include customer-facing commitments such as water supply interruptions, environmental commitments such as pollution incidents, storm overflows and baby water quality, and commitments related to asset health such as repairs to burst mains. As a result of underperformance in the last financial year, Ofwat is currently requiring 13 companies to return £157 million to customers. The new clause tabled by the Honourable Member is therefore not appropriate for this bill, given it would overlap with existing procedures. However, there is simply not enough improvements in performance across the water industry. And this is why we've launched the Independent Commission that will look at issues including performance and make recommendations on how to transform the water sector. I hope the Honourable Member is reassured about how customers will be reimbursed for poor performance and with the steps that we are taking to improve performance. On this basis, I ask the Honourable Member to withdraw his amendment.
Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Dr Hook. I thank the Minister for her comments there. I'm afraid I'm not fully reassured, and we would like to see the provision in this bill for any fines imposed on water companies to have a concomitant direct effect on customer bills, and that's what this well-intended amendment is put forward to do, to have some link between the two. So although I hear the sort of comments that the Minister has made, we would still like to push our amendment, new clause 3, to a formal vote, please.
Okay, the question is that new clause 3 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Division! Lock the doors! Okay, so time to do the register.
Dan Aldridge.
No.
Helena Dollymore.
No.
Tim Farron.
Aye.
Catherine Fuchs.
No.
Amanda Hack.
No.
Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes. Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr Neil Hudson.
Aye.
Jane Kirkham.
No.
Jerome Mayhew.
Aye.
Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffey.
No.
Andrew Pakes.
No.
Adrian Ramsey.
No.
David Reed.
Aye.
Jeff Smith.
No.
Just doing the calculation. The ayes were 5, the noes were 12, so the noes have it, the noes have it. So new clause 3 gone. We now come to new clause 4. I call Dr Neil Hudson to move new clause 4.
Thank you, Dr Hook. I beg to move new clause 4, which I am moving on behalf of His Majesty's loyal opposition. This amendment amends the Water Industry Act 1991 to insert new rules regarding the limits to the amount of money that can be borrowed by a water company, which the Secretary of State for DEFRA would be enabled to enact by means of statutory instrument. While we have had discussion about statutory instruments in the course of this committee stage, we, the opposition, hope that the government will recognise that this statutory instrument power proposed is one that needs to be made. This amendment we have tabled to ensure that water companies are not excessively borrowing money, which ultimately is bad for bill payers. When we talk about financial resilience, the heart of the issue is concern around borrowing and over-leveraging in the industry because of that borrowing. It is clear that there is a direct link between financial resilience, problems connected to borrowing, and the very survivability of the water firms themselves. This, of course, should be a huge concern to all of us. Consumers face concern that the very provision of their water is at risk, and we as legislators must work out how to deal with the issues relating to the risk of nationalisation of those water companies who have no other way of providing services, including the financial implications. This, of course, in turn can reverberate back to the consumers once again, who may face increased costs because of the financial support the government has to provide to keep water companies afloat. In other words, tackling the choices water companies may have made, including borrowing choices, and will make in the future, is an issue that the very future of our water industry requires us to correct. I note and acknowledge that the Minister, Baroness Hayman, and I reiterate my profound respect for the Minister opposite me, but also Baroness Hayman in this due regard in terms of the way that they have constructed themselves through this debate. I note that Baroness Hayman raised concern in the other place that a fixed percentage limit on borrowing could be a risk to investment at a crucial time for financial resilience and investment in the water industry. This is why my Conservative colleague, Lord Roborough, revised his amendment on this in the other place to give the Secretary of State the power to set limits by means of a statutory instrument. I must again pay tribute to my colleague and friend, Lord Roborough, for working so hard to raise the issue of financial resilience in the other place with this particular amendment. We are therefore not saying that a hard limit has to be set on borrowing levels, but merely giving the Secretary of State the option to do so if they feel it necessary to protect consumers from the negative effects of the water industry. Again, I come back to some of the points I made last week. By giving this statutory instrument the powers to the Secretary of State, a democratically elected minister in His Majesty's government, I think it improves democracy and accountability in terms of holding these water companies to account. So I don't think it's something that this Labour government needs to shy away from. I think this is a constructive amendment to actually give the Secretary of State that accountability to actually hold these water companies to account, which again, we all want to make sure that we are holding them to account. So something that I would ask the Minister to clarify on behalf of the government, if they do not see the need for this amendment, and I'm not necessarily preempting her, but I can imagine she will probably go down that line, how much borrowing do they consider acceptable from a water company? And what will they do to reduce the impact on the consumer of excessive borrowing and spending? This amendment also limits the amount of dividends that can be paid out to shareholders if the water company has exceeded the limit of borrowing money. Should a limit be set, it would therefore make water companies fairer in their practices to bill payers, as they know that when a company borrows, it will have less of an impact on consumer bills. While in government, the Conservatives gave Ofwat the powers to link performance to payout to shareholders and management of water companies. This new clause further aims to protect consumers from companies who are failing to prioritise their customers. With these points that I've given, we really do believe that the government could move a bit on this in terms of that democratic accountability with this statutory instrument, and we hope that they will look at this new clause favourably today.
Rules about borrowing.
Question is that new clause 4 be read a second time. Minister Emma Hardy.
Thank you, and I thank the Honourable Member for Epping Forest for tabling a new clause 4 which would implement a limit on borrowing by water companies. And I note that the noble lady, Baroness Hayman, had multiple discussions with the noble Lord, Lord Rober, on a similar amendment put forward in the House of Lords, and that Lord Rober was satisfied with our reasoning for not introducing restrictions on the borrowing through this bill. Debt has been raised in companies since privatisation and, of course, accelerated under the previous administration, and that in some instances levels of debt have reached a point at which the financial resilience of companies could be threatened. We have been clear Ofwat must continue to have a strong focus on company financial resilience to secure efficient long-term investment and deliver long-term value for money for customers and the environment. I would like to assure the House that Ofwat is already taking steps to closely monitor debt levels as part of their annual Monitoring Financial Resilience report, and will take action where the financial resilience of a company is threatened. Ofwat published their final determinations for Price Review 2024 in December, which included a confirmed £104 billion upgrade for the water sector. Investment in the water sector is financed upfront by investors and repaid by customers over time to smooth the impact on bills. Borrowing is therefore an important and key part of this process. Yes, of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
David.
I agree with many of the points that my honourable friend raised around debts, and he raised the serious question around how much debt is too much debt. So does Ofwat have a firm number on how much it thinks that companies should be borrowing, and at what point does it intervene?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Member. That was a helpful intervention to actually look at what the borrowing limit and debt limit should be. But we think placing new borrowing limits on companies at this late stage in the price review process would disrupt business planning. However, taking on board the points that have been made and concerns around the levels of debt that companies have, I refer everyone back to the fact we have announced an independent water commission, which will be a more appropriate vehicle for considering longer term reform options such as the Honourable Member's proposals. I'll finish this one and then I will. Company financial structures are one of a number of areas which could be explored under the Commission, and we do not want to preempt the outcome of the Commission through this amendment.
Charlie Maynard.
With respect, thank you, Chair, and thank you. With respect, I feel we're living in parallel universes. So taking Thames Water as an example, we have got 14 times the level of debt than cash flows now. Yes? You're saying could be threatened. I mean, you know, I guess I spent 25 years in finance, so that is very, very threatening in terms of that ratio. Yes, and Ofwat is closely monitoring. I mean, this is Moody's and Standard & Poor's have put this into junk bond ratings, seven ratings under the investment grade, and we're kind of peddling on regardless. And I just, if you may, please, could you give a view on what you think of Thames Water's level of debts and whether you think those levels of debt are threatening to the company or not? Thank you.
Minister Emma Hart.
Thank you, Chair. And I hope the Honourable Gentleman hasn't misunderstood, and certainly there is no desire from myself to keep peddling. What instead I think we want to do is have a look at all of the situation with companies' financial. This is a conversation that he knows that we've had outside of this room before as well. We think that we need to look at some of the longer reform options in terms of how companies' financial structure works. And this is why we have the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England leading our review, using his knowledge and expertise to look at how companies are structured. And I do not think this amendment is the appropriate place to preempt the outcome of that commission before the Commission has had an opportunity to report, and indeed before the Commission has an opportunity to listen to the contributions from the Honourable Gentleman through the call for evidence that is yet to be announced. So therefore, while I support, and I do want to stress, I do support the Honourable Member's sentiment, I would express caution around the risks of putting through changes of this magnitude without full and proper consideration, which we believe the Commission is the appropriate place in which to do it. I trust, therefore, the Honourable Member is reassured by... Yes.
Jerome Mayhew.
I'm grateful for the Honourable, for the Minister. Okay, perhaps she's right. Perhaps the detail of what percentage of debt or what multiple of revenue should be appropriate for debt, that should be established by the Commission, by the wider review. But the principle can surely be established now. The principle will be, from any investigation in this area, that debt will need to be capped or will need to be managed to have some oversight, because we've seen what's happened, particularly at Thames Water, when there has been no cap or oversight. The amendment, the new clause, just sets out the principle. The amount is set out by an SI. Can she not agree with that?
I respect the Honourable Gentleman's contributions when it comes to matters of finance, and I recognise his knowledge in this area, but I think he'll probably also acknowledge, even if not publicly, that using an amendment to determine whether or not the levels, what we think levels of debt are appropriate, is not the best way to make legislation for our country and indeed for the financial resilience of the water sector. I'm entirely confident that the best way to look at this seriously and involving contributions and taking recommendations from all the wider stakeholders is through the Water Commission. And it might be they draw similar conclusions, but it's not for us to preempt that now without having taken on board the opinions of many of the stakeholders first. I trust, therefore, the Honourable Member is reassured by the steps being taken by the Government and by Ofwat, and I ask the Honourable Member to withdraw his amendment.
Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Dr Hook, and thank you for the constructive tone that the Minister has engaged with throughout this whole debate. I have to say, I mean, I think we are going round in circles a little bit, because we are trying to hold these water companies to account. And on one hand, the government is saying, oh, it's okay, Ofwat can do this. And we've heard contributions to say, well, Ofwat are not using their powers and we need to give them more powers as well. All we are doing with this amendment is actually to put in place the principle that the Secretary of State has the capability to have some oversight over that. So if the Secretary of State feels and the government feels that Ofwat is doing as the legislation has designed, then they don't need to activate this. If, however, they do not feel that the Ofwat are doing that case, then this amendment gives that particular power. So again, I know the people in the back row are going to wince again, we're talking about teeth, okay? And when we're looking about Ofwat's capabilities and the Environment Agency's capabilities, in this particular case, we are saying to the democratically elected government of the day, there is an extra tooth here to actually hold over Ofwat. And if Ofwat are not doing their job, then potentially they can step in. I take on board the comments about the Commission, but again, to echo some of the comments from the third party about impatient for change, if this is then going into a Commission and going down the track, then I think that would be disappointing. And actually, what we're trying to do with this constructive amendment is just to give the capability to the government and the Secretary of State of the day to actually activate things if they feel that the processes that have been set up under the previous administration and under the new administration are not working well. So I would urge the Minister to think again on this, and we would still like to push this clause to a vote.
Okay. The question is that new clause 4 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Division! Lock the doors!
Dan Aldridge. No. Helena Dollymore.
No.
Tim Farron. Catherine Fuchs.
No.
Amanda Hack.
No.
Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr Neil Hudson.
Aye.
Jane Kirkham.
No.
Jerome Mayhew.
Aye.
Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffey.
No.
Andrew Pakes.
No.
Adrian Ramsey.
Aye.
David Reed.
Aye.
Jeff Smith.
No.
The ayes were 6, the noes were 11. Unlock! Okay, so that's gone. New clause 5 has already been debated. Yeah, we now come to new clause 5. I call Dr Neil Hudson to move new clause 5 formally.
I beg to move that new clause 5 be included in the bill, please.
The question is that new clause 5 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Division. Lock the doors.
Dan Aldridge.
No.
Helena Dollymore.
No.
Tim Farron.
Aye.
Catherine Fuchs.
No.
Amanda Hack.
No.
Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr Neil Hudson.
Aye.
Jane Kirkham.
No.
Jerome Mayhew,
Aye.
Charlie Maynard,
Aye.
Darren Paffey,
No.
Andrew Pakes,
No.
Adrian Ramsey,
Aye.
David Reed,
Aye.
Jeff Smith.
No.
Same numbers again? Oh, slightly different. Okay, the ayes were 6 and the noes were 11. So the noes have it, the noes have it. We now come to new clause 6. I call Dr. Neil Hudson to move new clause 6.
Thank you, Dr. Hook. This amendment to this bill, new clause 6, we believe is quite a fair and reasonable request to strengthen the bill. Quite simply, this amendment does what it says on the tin, requiring the government to report both on what impact they expect this bill to have on water pollution and then the actual and verifiable effects that the bill, when it becomes an act, is having on our water quality. It is completely agreed that accountability for addressing the quality of our water system should be at the heart of how we tackle water pollution and the issues related to it. This should be true of every actor involved, not just of water companies themselves, but in the government, whose regulation they are expected to abide by. The point here is that we cannot say rightly on the one hand that water companies should be expected to meet criteria to restore public trust, and then on the other hand suggest that the government should not likewise work to be accountable and uphold public trust on this issue. Even further, this amendment feeds into the basic fact that ensuring our water systems are being improved is not a one-time event that can be magically resolved with a single piece of legislation every now and then. It must be consistently in the focus of the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and all the agencies for whom this issue falls under their remit. The work of the agencies, such as the Environment Agency, is vital, and I pay tribute to them in terms of the hard work they make, not least as we have discussed, on a number of occasions, the role that the EA plays when flooding hits. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the people in the front line that do so much to actually keep people safe, but then make sure that the environment is protected, but also that the water quality that people have is safe and suitable. But the buck with this issue must stop not ultimately with the EA, but higher up, and actually with DEFRA and with the government. And this particular amendment helps do that in terms of that accountability. Once again, like our earlier discussions regarding the online publication of implementation reports, if there are legitimate reasons that the measures set out in the government's approach do not meet its target, they have the chance to lay out exactly why they believe this to be and give a justification for their finding on the Act's impact. As such, the amendment that we are proposing therefore provides a natural mechanism to ensure that long-term planning and review is taking place of the Act, and how the government is looking at the issue of water pollution and the actions the water industry has taken, or indeed needs to take, to improve the situation even further and into the future. We should not shy away from the fact that this would be building on the efforts taken by the previous government to look at this point. Our plan for water set out a 25-year plan to ensure our water companies were investing in our water system for the long term, not just while the issue was in the headlines of the day. That again is exactly why an amendment like this matters, since it ensures the continued focus of governments of all parties to focus on the protection of our waters, because it matters all of the time, not just when it becomes a political media issue. I would also like to highlight that the picture surrounding the water industry and its ability to reduce water pollution must consider evolving factors that affect the industry. The flooding that again we have seen in the past weeks has highlighted once again that our country is facing more regular extreme flooding events than it has done in the past. In simple terms, more flooding means excess water, more excess groundwater and surface water that can potentially enter the network. This in turn means more of a risk of the requirement for sewage overflows to maintain our water systems. With such events becoming more unpredictable in timing and yet more commonplace because of extreme weather events and the effects of climate change, looking at the evolution of issues such as this will be crucial in ensuring that any measures to improve overflows and water quality are successful in the long term. We need to make decisions now that have impact over the future, because we all want, in the long term, water quality to improve and be protected for future generations. To do this, we need long-term and consistent attention and reflection on the policies being enacted and their effects. It is with this in mind that this new clause would help facilitate this moving forward. Transparency, once again, is not a hindrance, but it helps everybody involved in managing the quality of our water system. Trust on this issue is something that can only be maintained if everyone tries to do what is right. And the government, in this particular case, of whichever political party, are no exception. We need to be trying to do the right thing. Given this, His Majesty's opposition believe this to be a highly reasonable and fair amendment to the bill, and we hope that the Minister may support it. Thank you.
Reporting of impact of the Act on pollution.
The question is that new clause 6 be read a second time. Minister Emma Harding.
Thank you. And regarding new clause 6, tabled by the honourable member for Epping Forest, and I will just quickly note the constructive and nice way he's taking part in this debate. I would like to start by, I want to come up with more dentist analogies, so I'm going to be thinking of those as we keep going. I would like to start by outlining that this bill would drive meaningful improvements in the performance and culture of the water industry. In line with this, the bill introduces many measures which will disincentivise pollution. For example, the bill provides Ofwat with legal powers to ban bonuses where companies fail to meet standards on environmental performance, financial resilience, customer outcomes or criminal liability. The bill will also enable automatic and severe fines, allowing regulators to take swift action. The bill enables the public to hold companies to account through introducing a new requirement for water companies to produce annual reports on pollution incident reduction. Collectively, these measures will strengthen enforcement, improve transparency and disincentivise water company pollution. The committee, and indeed the wider public, are able to see a more detailed assessment of the expected impact of the bill via the published impact assessment. I would like to reassure the committee that my department is committed to post-legislative scrutiny of primary legislation. DEFRA will work with the cross-party EFRA committee to assess the impacts of this Act 3 to 5 years after royal assent as part of the standard practice for all new legislation, and I welcome this scrutiny. Therefore, the Government cannot accept this amendment. While we agree on the importance of understanding the impact of this bill on environmental pollution, adding further reporting requirements to this bill would be duplicative and are unnecessary.
Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Dr. Mick, and thank you for the constructive response from the Minister. But we still feel that this is an important amendment in terms of the impact on water pollution, so we'd like to process again to a formal vote.
Thanks to go-go this afternoon. Okay. The question is that new clause 6 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
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 Of the contrary, no.
No.
Division! Lock the doors.
Dan Aldrich.
No.
Helena Dollymore.
No.
Tim Farron.
Aye.
Catherine Fuchs.
No.
Amanda Hack. Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr Neil Hudson.
Aye.
Jane Kirkham. Jerome Mayhew.
Aye.
Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffey.
No.
Andrew Pates.
No.
Adrian Ramsey.
Aye.
David Reed.
Aye.
Jeff Smith.
No.
11-6. The ayes were 6, the noes were 11. Unlock! Okay. Motoring along. And we now come to new clause 7, with which it will be convenient to debate new clause 20. I call Tim Farron to move new clause 7.
Thank you, Dr Hook. I will try to be brief, really, and speak to both of these amendments. And just for the committee's information, we will seek not to push new clause 7 to a vote, but will seek to push new clause 20. Essentially, what we're looking at here is, and I know the Minister will talk about the Cunliffe Review as, when these things will be considered. Nevertheless, we think all of us have spent enough time in opposition to come to some conclusions before this Parliament. it seems to me if nothing else had happened beforehand, Ofwat signing off of the bill increases in December of last year, 21% increase in bills, 14 times larger than the current inflation rates. In my part of the world, it's a 25% price rise. As I said earlier on, 11% of that of the bills being paid by my constituents will go to finance company debt. We see bonuses being signed off regularly, despite shocking performances being mentioned earlier on in the debate in this place this morning. We see Ofwat as a failed regulator. We see Ofwat as having a culture of a presumption of non-intervention. As we heard earlier, the £168 million worth of fines that still nearly 4 years later on Ofwat have not collected. So we see a culture of weakness, and indeed an organisation that the water companies consider to be weak and don't have respect for. It is partly the fault of Ofwat and its leadership, but it's also fault of the powers that are given to Ofwat, i.e. not sufficient. But also, again, the balkanisation, the fragmentisation of the regulatory framework with the EA, the Drinking Water Inspectorate in particular, Ofwat. And so what we have here is a proposal in New Clause 7, and then with more detail in terms of what might follow it in New Clause 20, to abolish Ofwat, but to set up a Clean Water Authority, which would merge the regulatory powers, in particular of the Environment Agency and of Ofwat. In my own constituency, I see that as being particularly relevant. I see, by the way, despite what I've said about the culture of Ofwat, people working within the sector deserve our praise and our thanks. These people working very hard with limited resources, doing really important work for us. And that includes, by the way, people on the front line for our water companies. I worry very much about the sense of demonisation of everybody working within the water industry, which is not fair, not accurate. And I think I probably speak for everybody when I say that we want to pay tribute to those people. It's not their fault. It's not their fault. Nevertheless, the system is one that is broken. Again, in my constituency, I see the distraction within the Environment Agency. We had Storm Desmond more than 9 years ago now. The flood defence is being built in Kendal now, overseen by the Environment Agency. Meanwhile, 8 miles up the road, you have Windermere, which is, of course, a centre of great concern because of pollution there. And only so many things that a small group of people can keep in their heads at any given time. And that you have... I'll happily give way. Yeah, sure.
The Honourable Member give way. Apologies. Thank you very much for giving way. I think we can safely say that Ofwat is really already under review, and in my mind they've got until 2030 to deliver everything that we want, and we've got this independent commission coming up. So I would say that this extra provision that you're trying to put into the bill is not necessary, and we should let the commission report and say what extra steps are necessary.
I thank the Honourable Member for her very reasonable contribution and intervention. In the extremely unlikely event that the committee rejects my new clause today, then we will, of course, submit these ideas to Sir John Cunliffe and we'll take part in the review, and we welcome the review. But nevertheless, my point simply is that the division of responsibility, the division of attention, particularly the Environment Agency, as a regulator, but also dealing with issues to do with flooding and so on, is something that they don't have the resource in order to do, which I know we'll talk about later on today, but also the fact that the regulatory setup is so fragmented means that the water companies simply run rings around the water, around their various regulators. It also just worth saying, one final point really, from new clause 20, is that we outline a potential way forward. We are not convinced at this stage that nationalisation, renationalisation would be affordable or wise. I'm not saying in principle I'm opposed to it, I just think it's not. It doesn't seem to me wise at this stage to do something that will cost the taxpayer a vast amount of money, will put money in the hands of people who've already fleeced us once already, does not feel, unless people can come up with a different model for doing so, that's the right way of doing it. At the same time, the current model of ownership also has clearly failed. And whilst what we suggest, which is a not-for-profit, a community benefit company model, looking at mutuals, for example, that this may be a way of migrating the system towards that model of ownership via what happens at the end of professional administration. I can see an intervention. I'm happy to take it.
I'm very grateful. It's in relation to new clause 20, specifically subclause 1b. The honourable member said that privatisation has demonstrably failed. I challenge him on that. There are elements of privatisation which have failed. That's the refinancing and the imposition of debt and the removal of that money through dividends in the noughties and, I'm sorry to say, between 2010 and 2015. That is a failure. That is a failure. But privatisation as a whole, I hope he would accept, has delivered over £160 billion of capex in investment into the industry, which simply would not have happened, would it, had it been up against schools, hospitals and the other calls on the public purse. And specifically, and I know I'm straying too long, but specifically on subsection B, where it says whether a public benefit company would best perform the role of current undertaker. Well, we have an example of this. I'm sure he'll know, which is Welsh Water. Is he able to point at a single metric where Welsh Water has outperformed its private sector comparators?
Right, so I'm not somebody who's wedded particularly to one model or another. Having said all of that, water is blindingly obviously a natural monopoly and should not be privatised in the first place. One metric, yes. Of the 16 water companies, Welsh Water is one of the few, the minority, that are financially sound. We noticed that the investment that is brought into the and performance is not necessarily and always a function of ownership. Absolutely, it is a combination of ownership, culture, and of course regulation. So we're simply saying that what we should be looking at is migrating the system to this model. But bear in mind, for all of the additional money that we can say we leverage in through private investment, you would look at the vast amount of money that leaks out of the system to shareholders, often by holding companies overseas and indeed in bonuses, which could otherwise have been spent internally. So this is an attempt to try to come up with a constructive alternative. We would abolish Ofwat, we would take the water regulatory powers of the Environment Agency, create a single regulator in the form of the Clean Water Authority, and we would also seek to migrate ownership within the water industry towards a mutual and community benefit model. And as I said at the beginning, Dr Hook, I will not push new clause 7 to the vote at this stage, but we would seek to do so for new clause 20. Thank you.
Abolition of the Water Services Regulation Authority.
The question is that new clause 7 be read a second time. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Dr Hook. And there's been a lot of cross-party consensus as we've gone through this in terms of trying to get measures in place. And I do respect the efforts of the honourable gentleman and the third party in its drive to improve the situation, not least in matters such as nature-based solutions moving forward. But I have to say from our perspective that his new clause 7 is potentially just perhaps an over-eager response to really throw out Ofwat completely at this juncture when we're wanting Ofwat to actually do its regulatory job. I think this would create more problems than it actually, perhaps, however it's intended, wanted to do. I know that they have argued that this step should be taken so that a new regulator should be set up in some way. This new clause, as has been tabled, doesn't really make a specific requirement or measures to enable a transition from Ofwat to this purported new regulator. So if we were to proceed with this new clause 7, we would be simply left in limbo and left in the lurch with regard to regulation of the industry. So in terms of this amendment, it's not that we believe that the situation is perfect, and we've debated the powers of the Environment Agency and the powers of Ofwat, and we agree that it's not perfect in terms of the water industry and regulators. And we've all heard first-hand issues that we're not happy with, such as executives moving into higher paid roles within water regulators. And we've heard evidence of that again in the iteration of the EFRA Select Committee in the last Parliament. But the reality is, in abolishing Ofwat, and I note that he very generously shouted out to the people who work in Ofwat and the Environment Agency, but then still, although he's not going to push it to a vote, still talks about abolishing Ofwat. In abolishing Ofwat, we'd be left with a vacuum while a new regulator was set up. Something that we can ill afford to do when there's so much work that we all agree need to be done. Establishing a new regulator is not something that's done overnight. It could take months or even years while structures are being established, the personnel needed to do its everyday work are appointed, and the like. And let us be honest too, making such a move would not come without financial cost either. And even if that money could be raised through government resources, which ultimately is taxpayers' money, we will be using that money to establish a completely new infrastructure for the water regulator rather than trying to enhance and give more power to what we already have. In addition to this, we have to remember that its role as a regulator is something that affects consumer bills too. While we all do not want to see water bills rise for any of our constituents, particularly in difficult economic times, bills would only have been higher if a regulator had not been there at all. If we are left with a vacuum while a replacement mechanism is put in place, and that does take a lot of time to get in place, do we really want to run the risk that unregulated companies raise prices even further in the meantime? And yes, we are in agreement. The status quo has not been good enough when it comes to water companies, but progress has been made and continues to be made in this seismic task. Water companies are starting to face the financial penalties for their failures, both to people and our precious environment. For example, back in November, Wessex Water were ordered to pay £500,000 for the loss of thousands of fish because of a sewage pumping failure. That very same month, Thames Water were also fined over £18 million for their failure to obey rules introduced on the spending of dividends. These incidents are not good news stories, and we should never say that they are, but they are signs that the mechanism is working, where Ofwat is holding the companies to account and trying to act, trying to use the teeth that are there. But there are early signs that giving the regulators these teeth, which we've heard a lot in this committee session, I know, does actually mean something in reality for the water companies that break those rules, a clear consequence for breaking rules that have been implemented. That's not the end of the story, but it is the start of the journey as we try and hold these water companies to account. As I've mentioned also, the pathway for inspections into water company activity is increasing. It is the whole approach from incident to investigation to penalty that needs to be examined and reviewed to drive change. And that is what has been done and what this legislation is trying to take forward. While things are not perfect, we need to allow the existing legislation and then this new legislation to take effect so that the regulator can actually get on and do its job from there. So we shouldn't put things in jeopardy by completely abolishing something moving forward. So I note that they have tabled this and are not pushing to a vote, but I just wanted to put on record our reservations for what they are suggesting. Thank you.
Minister.
Thanks for the nick of time. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to once again thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for his thorough consideration of this bill. Turning first to new Clause 7 in his name, which proposes the abolition of Ofwat. As the Honourable Member will be aware, and as he has already mentioned, in October 24, the UK and Welsh Government launched the Independent Commission to fundamentally transform how our water system works. The Commission, led by Sir John Cunliffe, will be broad-ranging, making recommendations in line with 8 objectives. These include specific objectives considering the roles, structures, responsibilities and powers of the regulators. It is right that this Commission, rather than this Water Special Measures Bill, is a vehicle for considering the water regulators' roles and responsibilities. This bill focuses on strengthening the powers of the regulators to drive improvements in performance. This bill will not and cannot fix all of the sector's problems. The Commission is the right place to consider the long-term future of the regulatory system and the role of the regulators. And indeed, Madam Chair, I would argue that we, as Labour government, want to move away from sticking plaster politics to fundamentally resetting and transforming the problems facing our country for good. I hope, therefore, the Honourable Member is content that this amendment is unnecessary. Turning to new Clause 20, also tabled by the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale, which sets out requirements for a water review undertaken by the Secretary of State. I think we're all agreed that we have seen years of water company underperformance, and we all agree there is a clear need to fundamentally reset the water sector. And while I understand that the Honourable Member is seeking to ensure that any review of the water sector is sufficiently thorough, the Government is confident that the Commission's scope is broad and comprehensive. Sir John will be supported by a range of experts from across the regulatory, environment, health, engineering, customer, investor and economic sectors to effectively examine the sector as a whole, including the regulatory framework. By setting out considerations for a water review in primary legislation, we risk prejudicing or preempting the outcome of the current Commission as well as its independence. The sector is facing complex challenges which require the support of customers, environment groups, investors and companies alike to address. An independent review is best placed to find solutions to these challenges. It is critical its independence is preserved. The Commission will report its findings in summer 2025, which the Government will consider in full before outlining its next steps. Therefore, I hope the Honourable Member understands that in order to avoid duplication and importantly to maintain the independence of the current Independent Commission, the Government will not be accepting this amendment.
Tim Farron.
Well, we, as I said earlier on, will not push new clause 7 at this stage. Nevertheless, we will choose, if it is your will, to push a new clause 20 to a vote. Notwithstanding all that's been said about Sir John Cunliffe review, and we would indeed want to proactively engage with him and with that review and believe it has great potential to do good. It also does no harm to propose solutions at this stage, and this is what we would seek to do.
When it sequentially arrives there, but the question is that new clause 7 be read a second time. I have to ask this anyway, do I? No. Okay, does everyone object to new clause 7 being withdrawn? No. Okay, it's vanished, it's gone. Right. New clause 8. We now come to new clause 8. I called Tim Farron to be
Really briefly, similar scope, and I don't want to detain the committee for too long, I promise you. So really, if you look at new clause 8, we're referring to the duties of the water regulators for clean water under the Water Industry Act of 1991. You'll see the list of duties that the regulator would be able to mark water companies against and see whether they perform are on clean drinking water, bathing waters of excellent quality, lakes, rivers and beaches of high ecological status, the conservation of water resources and reasonable water bills. Interestingly enough, these are significantly greater detail than currently exists against Ofwat from the 1991 Act. What we're seeking to do then is to beef up Ofwat's powers and so that water companies are marked against these higher and more comprehensive standards. We don't think this would be controversial. We would seek to push this to a vote.
Duties of water regulators for clean water.
And just, can I say, at this juncture, the clerk keeps reminding me, I think because we've got a lot of new members in the room, Tim Farron is not guilty of this, but people keep saying you, and that's a cardinal sin. You have to say the honourable member, because you is me, and I'm not doing anything except sitting there saying this unlock the doors stuff. So, the question is that new clause 8 be read a second time. Minister Emma Hardy.
Oh, thank you so much. And can I say, often said, not always meant, but it is indeed a pleasure to serve under your chairwomanship. And I thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for the intention behind new clause 8. Ofwat has a range of primary duties, including to protect the interest of consumers, secure that companies properly carry out their functions, and secure that companies are able to finance delivery of their statutory duties. Removing Ofwat's duty to ensure companies are appropriately financed would put at risk companies' ability to deliver for customers and the environment. I would also note that this amendment seems contradictory to the other amendments tabled in the Honourable Gentleman's name. For example, new clause 19 and new clause 23, tabled by the Honourable Member, seek to increase regulation around water company financial resilience, whereas this amendment, new clause 8, seems to want to reduce it. Ofwat must therefore continue to ensure water companies can finance the proper carrying out of their statutory obligations in line with the outcome this amendment seeks. Ofwat also already has a primary duty to seek to secure that companies deliver their statutory obligations, including environmental obligations. Ofwat's existing duties, combined with the strengthened powers for regulators in this bill, will therefore drive the desired outcome of this amendment and ensure that the environment is at heart of water companies' activities, which is something I'm sure we all agree. In addition, the Independent Commission of the Water Sector will look at long-term, wider reform of the water sector, including, as we've discussed, considering and clarifying the role of regulators. We do not therefore wish to prejudice the outcome of the Commission through implementation of this amendment. I hope my honourable member is therefore reassured that Ofwat's existing core duties capture the intent of this amendment and therefore be considering the duties of Ofwat more broadly through the Independent Commission. For these reasons, we will not be accepting this amendment.
Tim Farron.
Very briefly, I really thank the Minister for her response and all that. This is not to replace the business side of Ofwat's regulatory framework and powers, but to supplement it. And indeed, it makes the point that I've said earlier on, which is it is odd to have, in the broadest sense, and I know it's not entirely true, but Ofwat looking at the business side of the water industry and the EA looking at the environmental side of it. They are clearly one and the same, or they ought to be. And so what we're simply doing is trying to draw these things together. This is not about reducing Ofwat's powers on one side or to beef them up on the other, but this is about additionality. So we think it's entirely consistent. And I do hear, and it's a, you know, if I was on that crease, my straight bat would be Sir John Cunliffe every single time. I get that. But surely there's got to be some point in this water bill. And what we're trying to do here is to push the government to strengthen the regulators that we have. We've had the debate just earlier about the extent to which Ofwat should exist or not. But if we take that the government have a majority and therefore Ofwat is probably likely to overcome my time on this committee, what do we do to make Ofwat therefore a more holistic regulator with more power, more scope? We therefore think there's a very strong case for new clause 8. We need to seek to push it to a vote.
Okay. The question is that new clause 8 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
I think we know the answer, but let's do it anyway. Lock the doors.
Dan Aldridge. No. Eleanor Dollimore.
No.
Tim Farron.
Aye.
Catherine Fuchs.
No.
Amanda Hack.
No.
Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr Neil Hudson.
No vote.
Jane Kirkland. Jerome Mayhew.
No vote.
Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffey.
No.
Andrew Pates.
No.
Adrian Ramsey.
Aye.
David Reed.
No vote.
Jeff Smith.
No.
Okay, slightly different numbers, I think. It's usually 11. Keeps me 11. Okay, the ayes were 3. The noes were 11. So the noes have it, Unlock! Okay. We now come to new clause 10. I call Tim Farron to move new clause 10.
Okay, again, hopefully briefly, the Environment Agency will have more powers as a consequence of all this. There will be greater regulation. There will be an impact upon the Environment Agency as an organisation. Our experience, and it's my privilege to represent the English Lake District or large chunks of it, we have an agency full of really good people, qualified people, professionals, also dedicated people from the area who love the area, and yet they find themselves overwhelmed with the responsibilities that they have already. I made an allusion earlier on, and it just helps to perhaps just give a sense of how the organisation coped with the challenges it has. So we are still in the process of having the walls built around the River Kent to protect the town of Kendal and its businesses from a repeat of the devastation we received in December 2015, where something like 6,000 of my residents lost their homes, and indeed we saw just under 1,000 businesses devastated as well. Because the Environment Agency is looking after that. As I said, just up the road, you've got Windermere, but also Coniston, Ullswater, the lakes and rivers, and indeed coastal areas of our beautiful part of the world. We are stretching the capacity of those people, to say the least, already. And you begin to see it in real time. As we're trying to deal with sewage spills in the tributaries that lead into Windermere, and we see many such failures, the Environment Agency, in trying to find the time to go and regulate and to observe and to scrutinise, are distracted, understandably, by this huge civil engineering project they're overseeing in Kendal to protect that town from flooding. And so it's to pay tribute to people in the EA, but to recognise that already they're under enormous pressure. So the Minister has said that there'll be 500 new members of staff for the Environment Agency. That is one answer to the question. What we're trying to put down here is recognising that is still only one person per English constituency, and we need to therefore test the extent to which the Environment Agency has the capacity to do its job, because part of the problem is insufficient regulatory powers, and the other part of the problem is agencies without the resource to police the powers that they already have. And so ours is it aims to be a helpful amendment. It is an amendment that recognises the government is seeking to do good and will do some good through this bill, but we need to make sure the agencies there to deliver that good have the capability of doing it.
Impact of the Act on the Environment Agency.
The question is that new clause 10 be read a second time. Who wants to go? Minister Emma Hartley.
Thank you very much, and I thank the Honourable Member for suggesting new clause 10 and agree that it is important to understand the impacts of the Act on the Environment Agency. And I'd like to echo remarks made by all of the spokespeople on the wonderful work that the Environment Agency does, particularly those working in the front line and those who've been working New Year's Day trying to support communities who have been flooded. But I'd like, and I'd also like to pay tribute to the Wildlife and Countryside Link, who have shown interest in this, and in fact, while I'm on my feet, all of the environmental groups and organisations and charities who have shown an interest in their bill. And in fact, their tireless campaigning is probably what has led to many of us being stood here discussing it today. However, I would like to reassure the Honourable Gentleman that the current provisions in the bill are sufficient to do what he wants. Through clause 10 in the bill, the Environment Agency will be able to recover costs for the full extent of their water company enforcement activities, including for new provisions in the bill. This will allow the Environment Agency to fully fund their water industry enforcement functions and meet the requirements of the Act, ensuring that polluters can be held to account for breaches of their obligations. Environment Agency funding will continue to be closely monitored by DEFRA as a sponsoring department, which ensures that the regulator is fully equipped to carry out its duties and functions effectively and deliver for the public and the environment. The Environment Agency are already recruiting up to 500 additional staff for inspections, enforcement and stronger regulation of the water industry, increasing compliance checks and quadrupling the number of water company inspections by March this year. This increased capacity is funded around 55 million per year through increased grant in aid funding from DEFRA and additional funding from water quality permit levies charges levied on water companies. I hope the Honourable Member is reassured that these measures will ensure that the Environment Agency consistently has the resources it needs to fund its regulatory activities. As such, the proposed new clause is unnecessary and therefore I ask him to withdraw it.
Tim Farron.
So I'm not entirely reassured, but partially at least, and we've no desire to push this to a vote.
Does anyone object to new clause 10 being withdrawn? No. New clause 10 by leave withdrawn. We now come to new clause 11. I call Tim Farron, or in fact Charlie Maynard, to read.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a very nuts and bolts thing. This is the reason I believe we're here is we're trying to make a better water sector, I believe. It says duty to publish maps of sewage catchment networks. So, and I'll just rattle through what it says. So, must publish maps of sewage catchment networks, must illustrate pumping stations, pipes and other works constituting part of the undertaker's sewage network, must be published within 12 months of passing of this Act, and must be publicly accessible on the undertaker's website. I'm a district councillor as well as an MP, and we have found in my ward of Stanley, Aston, Stanton, Harcourt, parish councillors, members of the public, campaigners, grappling for information and failing to find it. And many people don't know how to do a freedom of information request. This information means that people don't know where the sewage is going from and to, and this leads to confusion and means that the problems are further away from us. Putting these maps in the public domain, making them easily accessible, making sure that not only the pumping stations and the treatment works, but also the pipes which are connecting all of those, which are not automatically clear, are always in the public domain, always easily accessible, means we're getting to a solution quicker. That's all this is. So I'm sure I'm probably going to get a response saying that we have to wait for the Water Commission. It's like, I guess I'm going to just express some disappointment, because these things, they don't cost any money. We move quicker to solve these problems. I would really like just a culture of, if that's a good idea, let's do it. Thank you.
Duty to publish maps of sewage catchment networks.
The question is that new clause 11 be read a second time. Minister Emma Hartley.
Thank you. And with regards to new clause 11, I understand the intent of the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale's proposal. The location and health of a water company's assets is key to ensuring their maintenance and improvement. Under Section 199 of the Water Industry Act, companies are required to keep records of the location of many of their sewers, lateral drains or disposal mains. Members of the public are able to request this from water sewage companies in map form. Furthermore, the Environment Agency hosts a public register of information relating to all sites and assets permitted under the environmental permitting regulations. And as of the 1st of this month, all water companies are required to publish discharge data from their storm overflows. Water UK's centralised map shows this in near real-time data for water companies across England in a publicly accessible format. Clause 3 of this bill extends those requirements to publishing information on the frequency and duration of discharges from emergency overflows. And again, refer members to the fact sheet which we've produced and printed and is on the table just there. This is another big step towards information on all areas of the sewage network that are discharging sewage by being publicly available, creating world-leading transparency. Whilst I welcome the spirit of the Honourable Member's proposal, it would be impractical to map all the sewers installed pre-1989 in only 12 months, as required by this clause. To do so on these timescales would impact the £105 billion of investment and associated available resources to improve the sewer networks in Price Review 24. With no wish to revisit the debates that we had the other day, there is also always a balance between the need for transparency and the need for action. And in previous clauses, the Honourable Member has mentioned his desire for action and why don't we move on things quicker, and at the same time the desire to monitor more, map more, which will obviously impact on us delivering the action required. The Honourable Member will, as he's mentioned, be aware of the review, and it's not just playing this with a straight bat, it's the fact that I think it's the best way in which to deal with the fundamental reset of the water industry. And this will be looking at transparency in the sector. However, I go back to the point, there is always a balance to be made between being as transparent as possible, but also getting on with fixing the problem. I said before, I do not want to become the minister that monitors everything and doesn't deal with the actual problem. I want to deal with the actual problems. So the Commission is the best avenue to explore the limitations of the current approach to asset mapping and the best way to achieve the outcomes the Honourable Member is seeking, including, of course, the best way to take advantage of new and innovative technologies. So while we do agree that transparency in the sector is key to real change, this new clause does not build greatly on the existing requirements in section 119 of the same Act, and as such, the Government cannot accept this amendment.
Charlie Maynard to respond.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. A few points there. So obviously I'm not asking, I mean, frankly, it's pretty worrying that we don't have sewer map networks around the country. That's kind of pretty fundamental thing that you would want a water utility company to have. But I acknowledge that, and nowhere in this amendment am I proposing that this is mapped. What I'm simply saying is taking the existing maps we have and getting them into the public domain by default. And those are not currently in the public domain by default. You have to have a Freedom of Information request. So that's one thing. The second point is this whole idea, I would suggest the Minister might be being a little bit disingenuous about this kind of, oh, well, we're just being asked to monitor, we want to act. It's like, you can do both. I mean, this is not simply the idea that, you know, if we're monitoring, we're not acting. There's plenty to be acting on. There's plenty to be monitoring. And I also find the conflation of saying, well, if we put in flow monitors, then we need to cover the quality. It's like, yeah, both. Yes, all of it. Let's do it now. It's not an either or, and I don't like the suggestions occasionally that there may be either ors on those. So, however, having said all that, I will withdraw this amendment now. Thank you.
Does anyone object to new clause 11 being withdrawn? Thought not. New clause 11 by leave withdrawn. We now come to new clause 12, which will be convenient to debate with new clause 27. I call, is it Tim Farron or is it Charlie again? Tim Farron! To move!
Thank you very much.
New clause 12.
A short and I hope consensual amendment relating to chalk streams, which we've already discussed, and then also something more widely about the powers of national parks. First of all, on chalk streams, we undoubtedly have a situation where we see that 85% of all the chalk streams on planet Earth are in the south of England. We are in a position where the impact that has on the biodiversity of this part of the world and more broadly is hugely, hugely significant, creating pure, clean water from underground chalk aquifers and springs, ideal for wildlife to breed and to thrive. They make a vital contribution to global biodiversity, natural habitats for many plants and animals. They will exist in many members' constituencies, not in mine, but as a resident of planet Earth, I still reckon they're very important. And I think it is worthy, they are worthy therefore of specific attention and regulation within this bill. And so I commend that to you. The new clause 27 makes specific reference to the powers and the importance of national parks. It is my great privilege to represent a constituency with two of them, the Dales and the Lakes. We recognise the importance of national landscape, which of course includes areas of outstanding natural beauty as they have been known until relatively recently. We recognise many of the worthy inclusions and mentions within the Glover review of reform within our national parks. I remember meeting Julian Glover as he began that review and agree with much that he recommended, and was disappointed the previous government did so little with his recommendations. I'll be happy to give way. Yeah.
I'm grateful just to save everyone's time and not make a speech on this, but I am concerned about new clause 12 because it gives an absolute duty on chalk streams. I represent a constituency where I have several chalk streams, including the Stipke, which goes through Walsingham, and it says that where relevant undertaker operates or has an effect on a chalk stream, that undertaker must, so it's direct, and it must secure and maintain high ecological status for such chalk streams. The problem with that, we all want that outcome. The problem for that is that water undertakers are not the only negative impact on chalk streams, and yet you're giving them the requirement to ensure, which is absolute in its term. But we know that farming and also increasingly road detritus also affects chalk streams. So how does he square that circle?
He makes a very good point, and I think it's good. We will later come to a new clause we put forward with regard to planning, and so undoubtedly development and industrial activity has an impact also. This goes back though to my original comment about the importance for singularity and regulation, and whilst we recognise that the water companies may not be entirely responsible, we think that the regulator should have responsibility across the piece. But he makes a good point, and in terms of whether we're not planning to push new clause 12 to a vote, but we would be therefore keen that the Minister would look at what we have said, and indeed what his honourable friend and himself have said in previous days in committee about the importance of chalk streams, that they should be written onto the face of this bill. If I could move on to new clause 27, which relates particularly to national parks. So every single lake, river and stream, every single one in England's national parks is polluted one way or another. There has been no regard by water companies for national park status in this process. It's not that the lakes and the rivers and waterways of areas outside of national parks don't matter. They absolutely do. A vast part of my constituency is not in either of the national parks. Nevertheless, for there not to be a higher bar in our national parks begs the question, what's the point in the national parks? And so we need to make sure that there is that stipulation made. So this amendment would force water companies to specifically reduce pollution in these precious places. In particular, and I'll talk about my own community, United Utilities' negligent treatment of the lake at Windermere has been a standout example. Between 21 and 23, over a 2-year period, 165 hours of illegal sewage was pumped into Windermere, England's largest lake, the centre of our hospitality and tourism economy, 7 million visitors every year just to that part of the Lake District alone, alongside the 20 million that visit the lakes overall. Now, for the record, I should say, Dr Hook, I still swim in Windermere, and I don't think I'm a complete lunatic. So it is not an open sewer by any means, but nevertheless, for so many people, the reality that I think it's 14 assets that United Utilities own on or around the tributaries of Windermere or its connecting lakes, that so many of them are not fit for purpose. I'm thinking about the pumping station at Sorey, for example, the water treatment work at Ambleside. It is unconscionable that we have these assets, many of them ageing, underinvested in, and the water company, United Utilities, failing to take action. Windermere is known globally. It's part of Britain's national brand. If its reputation becomes unfairly sullied, this will be a hit on the revenues of my constituents, as well as I'm happy to give way.
I'm grateful for the intervention being allowed, as ever. The same point, I'm afraid, is I have to make on new clause 27, because if you look at the proposed section for clause 4a, little 1a, it also has an absolute duty on the undertaker. It must. So this is a direction, secure and maintain high ecological status. And so, and that has to be achieved within, 4 years? 3 years. So I just question the practicality of that. And I'm also keen to highlight under 4A subsection 7, this also includes the Broads, which I'm lucky enough to represent the Broads, and it would be a travesty where the Broads have all sorts of factors affecting them. We have a high degree of recreational use, boating use, as well as angling. It's a farming environment where we've got grazing in the marshes, particularly down in the Halvergate marshes. And yes, we've got Anglian Water, who has affected water quality in negative ways, as well as in some positive ways, to give them credit. But to give an absolute duty on them when they only have partial control of the answer and over a 3-year time frame. Does he agree with me that that's unrealistic?
So it's very clear. I don't think it's unrealistic. I think we need to be ambitious, but I also do absolutely accept that there are multiple sources of pollution. But if I promise to be very brief, because I'm talking about my patch and that's not of interest to everybody. Nevertheless, it's key to point out that pollution in Windermere generally comes from 3 sources. It is true, agricultural runoff is an issue, but sadly, the policies of this and the previous government and over a period of time, effectively the destocking of the fells means that is a massively reducing impact upon Windermere and the broader catchment. So the bigger 2 problems are indeed these 14 assets that United Utilities have either on or around the lakes or its tributaries. There's also the best part, 2,000 septic tanks or around the lake or its tributaries. And unlike septic tanks and indeed package treatment works in many rural communities, these are not scattered all over in the middle of nowhere. These are in a ring around a lake, most of them within yards of a mainline sewer. And so it's entirely possible for the water companies, with significant bill benefit that they could gain as a consequence for this, income benefit they could gain as a consequence, to mainline a large chunk, massive proportion of the sources of sewage spillage into the lake via the septic tanks and the package treatment works being brought into the system. So, of course, it's a slightly selfish amendment, but I think it's really important for national parks right across the country that we would seek to make them at the highest possible bar and make sure, therefore, they're set as an example for others to follow. And we would seek to push new clause 27 to a vote.
Environmental duties with respect to chalk streams.
The question is that new clause 12 be read a second time.
I'm happy not to.
Okay. The Minister wants to conclude though, surely. Surely!
Surely, Madam Chair. I thank the Honourable Member for bringing both amendments to the attention of the committee, and it's always nice to have a conversation about the beautiful chalk streams and national parks that we have in our country. And I'll start by addressing new clause 12. This amendment will have significant implications for existing legal frameworks, operational delivery, and would not necessarily result in environmental improvements for chalk streams. Chalk streams have already established objectives to conserve and restore their ecological health. Through the Water Environment Regulations, the default objective for all chalk streams in England is to achieve good ecological status. Good ecological status is a high standard and represents a thriving aquatic environment with only minor disturbances from natural conditions. High ecological status equates to water almost entirely undisturbed from its natural conditions. Setting high ecological status as the objective for all chalk streams, overriding cost-benefit assessments, would have wide-ranging impacts on future planning developments and human interaction with chalk streams, including restricting farming and restricting fishing. Any planning for housing developments which would even have a minor impact on the water quality of chalk streams would be restricted without impractical and disproportionately costly mitigation measures. This amendment would also place achieving this demanding objective on water companies only, as indeed the honourable gentleman opposite has highlighted, regardless of the pressures that are actually impacting chalk streams. This would not allow for the consideration of technical feasibility or costs, which would ultimately be borne by water bill payers. The amendment would necessitate amendments to the water environment regulations and habitat regulations, creating complexity and difficult delivery implications. The government is carrying out our review to look at how to transform our water system and clean up our rivers, lakes and seas for good. This review is the appropriate vehicle for considering broader reforms, including to the overarching target for the water sector, which is why the government will not be accepting this amendment. However, I would like to highlight, I do recognise the intent behind the amendment, even if not the way the amendment is written in itself. Turning now to new clause 27, the government, and I would like to thank the honourable member for proposing this amendment. The government agrees that national parks form a vital part of environmental heritage and must be protected. And I've also been known occasionally to go for a swim in Windermere as well, so maybe I'll bump into the honourable gentleman one summer there. It is for this reason that the government has committed to strengthen the statutory purposes of national parks and national landscapes, giving them a clear mandate to recover nature. We will also strengthen the role that public bodies, including water companies, must play in delivering better outcomes for nature, water, climate and access to nature in national parks through new regulation. For example, the government will seek to use powers in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023 to ensure relevant authorities, including water companies, deliver better outcomes in protected landscapes. Regulations made under powers in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023 will provide a holistic approach to conserving and enhancing our nation's treasured protected landscapes. This is preferable to making piecemeal changes through several different pieces of legislation. The government is absolutely committed to ensuring significant reductions in sewage discharges in a way that ensures customers are not faced with unmanageable increases in their water bills. For example, through the Storm Overflow Discharge Reduction Plan, we are requiring the elimination of ecological harm from sewage discharges and are requiring water companies to prioritise action at high priority sites, such as sites of special scientific interest and bathing waters. When it comes to illegal sewage discharges, these are not permissible in any circumstances or at any locations. They are, by their nature, illegal sewage discharges, Madam Chair, including in the national parks. I want to assure the committee that where evidence of illegal action is identified, the regulators will not hesitate to take action. I would also like to assure the honourable member that the 2024 price review package will include allowances to fund projects to reduce pollution in Lake Windermere. The Storm Overflow Discharge Reduction Plan also front-loads action in particularly important and sensitive areas such as Lake Windermere. But this amendment also puts in place a number of other requirements which I will turn to now. The amendment suggests a special administration and licence eligibility provision, meaning that where water companies fail to comply with the other requirements of this amendment or where they cannot demonstrate adequate progress in reaching the requirement, they must be put into special administration. This would be inappropriate and does not meet the high bar for use of a special administration regime. This can only be initiated from a performance perspective if the company can no longer fulfil its principal statutory duties or where there has been or likely to be serious breaches of an enforcement order. This amendment, like the other amendment in this group, requires sites to maintain high ecological status. I have already spoken about the high standard good ecological status represents, but I will touch on it further. Surface waters with good ecological status support a diverse group of aquatic invertebrates, fish, mammals and birds, and therefore I want to reassure the committee that good ecological status is in fact a very high standard to achieve, requiring high... Yes?
I'm really very grateful for the Minister for giving way. I just would like her comment on the issue that we have. I'm focusing primarily on the Norfolk Broads, which I represent a good chunk of them. The requirement to make a mandatory obligation on the water undertaker to ensure high ecological status above good ecological status, the point that the Minister is just making. Does she agree with me that where they are a primary input into the quality of the water in the Norfolk Broads, they are not the only influencer? And for whilst the intention to create and encourage high ecological status in the Broads is a very good one and one that I share, does she agree with me that the draft of this particular clause is not appropriate?
Minister. I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, and he's quite right to highlight that the pollution caused in the Norfolk Broads and in many other areas does not come from water companies alone, and in fact, as already has been discussed, comes from the environment, comes from road runoff and various other measures. And as we've stated, high ecological status could potentially involve not being able to fish in those waters at all, which I know is a recreational activity in his area. And it may restrict planning for housing developments with any minor effects on the water quality of water bodies in national parks as well. The government therefore cannot accept either amendment, although I do recognise, as I've said, the intention behind the amendments, but I hope the honourable member feels able to withdraw both.
Tim Farron.
Well, in short, happy to not push new clause 12 to a vote, or we seek to 27 when it comes to that stage.
Does anyone object to new clause 12? New clause 12 by the We now come to new clause 13. Tim Farron.
Thank you, Chair. New clause 13 and 14 are connected, so with your permission I might speak to both of them. They are roughly the same issue. Is that okay? Yeah, thank you. Just don't want to detain the committee any longer than I need to. I wonder, this is about a very vexing and very serious issue, and that is the presence of poly and perfluorinated alcohol substances in our waterways and in drinking water in particular. And it's an issue that I want to pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Twickenham, for her championing of this issue in this place and outside it. The amendment raises and attempts to raise the existing guidance from the Drinking Water Inspectorate on PFAS levels in drinking water to a statutory level. That's the key point of the amendment. The Water Special Measures Bill seeks to increase regulatory power over water companies, and this amendment would increase the Drinking Water Inspectorate's power to enforce this guidance regarding PFAS. There is currently no legal limit on the amount of PFAS present in our drinking water, only guidance, even though the Environment Agency and the Health and Safety Executive have both recommended that it should be so. This amendment would require water companies to prioritise and take a proactive stance on limiting PFAS in drinking water. Currently, if a water company were to breach PFAS guidance, its regulatory compliance score would not be affected, as it would lead, as if lead were found in its water, for example. This would encourage them to make investments treating water to remove PFAS. This is an important first step to prompting the government to create a fully fledged chemical strategy to deal with chemical pollution of all kinds and start with the most direct threat to human health, which is the direct consumption of PFAS through drinking water. PFAS, they are toxic, they are forever, and they are very pervasive. Links have been found between PFAS chemicals and a host of health issues, such as, but not limited to, cancer, thyroid disease, fertility issues, lowered birth weight, and weakened bones in children, as well as immune resistance to vaccinations. That is the case for new clause 13. For new clause 14, we simply have a situation where this amendment would it basically creates puts this duty upon the water companies themselves to take responsibility for the reduction and prevention of PFAS chemicals in water systems, that each water company is responsible.
Guidance on poly and perfluorinated alkyl substances.
The question is that new clause 13 be read the second time. Minister.
Thank you. And as Following the Honourable Gentleman, I'll respond for new clause 13 and new clause 14 at the same time. And I thank the Honourable Member for proposing these clauses, because it is indeed an incredibly important issue, and for highlighting the importance of PFAS monitoring. But I want to reassure everybody, the quality of drinking water in England is exceptionally high and among the best in the world. It is important to me that it remains this way. Across government, we are working to assess levels of PFAS occurring in the environment, their sources and potential risks, to inform future policy and regulatory approaches to safeguard current high drinking water quality and ensure our regulations remain fit for purpose. Water companies have a statutory obligations under the Water Supply Water Quality Regulations 2016 to carry out risk assessments to identify anything that could pose a risk to health or cause the water supply to be unwholesome, and this includes the risk of PFAS. And I'll just quickly explain which PFAS are tested for in drinking water. The Drinking Water Inspector has issued a series of information letters to water companies setting out a risk assessment methodology and associated monitoring strategy to up to 48 individual PFAS compounds. The guideline values for POS and PFOA are agreed with the UK Health Security Agency and have been applied to 48 individual PFAS. The DWI's guidance will be reviewed and updated where necessary. The Drinking Water Inspectorate has provided guidance on PFAS to water companies since 2007, and as explained, this is regularly updated as new research emerges. In July 2024, DEFRA announced a rapid review of the Environmental Improvement Plan to deliver on our legally binding targets to save nature. This includes how best to manage chemicals, including the risks proposed by PFAS, and we're working very closely with the DWI on all matters, including PFAS. I would like to reassure the Honourable Member that the Water Industry Act 1991 already provides the necessary powers to amend current regulations to deal expressly with PFAS should the Government wish to do so. And I should also mention, though I forget the constituency, and I'm hoping that the Honourable Gentleman would help me, I'm having a meeting with his Honourable friend on this Minerva.
Twickenham.
Thank you. And we'll pretend I said Twickenham, with the Honourable Lady for Twickenham on this issue. I hope the Honourable Member is reassured this clause is not suitable for this bill. Therefore, I ask him to withdraw his amendment. But turning to new clause 14, which focuses on chemical contaminants entering our waterway. I agree with the Honourable Member on the importance of the issue, which is why, as I've already announced, we're having a rapid review of the Environmental Improvement Plan to deliver on our targets to restore nature. And this includes looking carefully at the risks posed by PFAS. This review will consider and set out effective measures to mitigate harmful chemical substances entering the environment, water through the environment. Through the Chemicals Investigation Programme, we are working with the water industry to understand how levels of contaminants in treated wastewater affect our water environment. The programme will provide valuable information to understand the effectiveness of different measures to tackle chemical contamination of our rivers. There are significant costs associated with end-of-pipe technologies at sewage treatment works to manage the more challenging chemicals such as PFAS. This is why we need to prevent contaminants entering the water system in the first place before they get to the wastewater treatment works, where the cost for treatment will be unfairly borne by water companies rather than water customers, rather than the polluters. And work is continuing across government to help us assess levels of PFAS occurring in the environment, their sources and potential risks, so that they informs future policy and regulatory approaches to safeguard our current high drinking water quality and ensure regulations remain fit for purpose. The DWI expects water companies to plan to progressively reduce PFAS concentrations in treated water by implementing a reactive and systematic risk reduction strategy. This is why we need to prevent them entering the water in the first place, and I hope the Honourable Member is reassured by the actions that we are taking on this issue and will withdraw his amendment.
Tim Farron.
I'm substantially assured by the Minister taking this very seriously, and grateful that she's meeting my honourable friend, the member for Twickenham, who has championed this so well. I think that all the same, whilst I accept, if I don't agree, I accept the point she's making about the way in which we're doing this, which is, I guess, contained in the new clause 14. So I won't push new clause 14 to a vote. New clause 13 is simply saying what the Health and Safety Executive and the Environment Agency are already saying, which is these chemicals are deeply dangerous and therefore their restrictions should be moved from guidance to a statutory level. We think that ought to be a no-brainer, and so we would seek to push new clause 13 to a vote.
The question is that new clause 13 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no.
No.
Division! Lock the doors.
Dan Aldrich. No. Helena Dollimore. No. Tim Farron.
Aye.
Catherine Fuchs.
No.
Amanda Hack.
No.
Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr Neil Hudson.
No vote.
Jane Kirkham.
No.
Jerome Mayhew.
No vote.
Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffey.
No.
Andrew Pakes.
No.
Adrian Ramsey.
Aye.
David Reed.
No vote.
Jeff Smith.
No.
The ayes were 3 and the noes were 11, so the noes have it. The noes have it. We now come to new clause 14. You didn't want to move to vote, wasn't it? Does anyone object to new clause 14 being withdrawn? No. Okay. We now come to new clause 17. Oh, what's happened here? Okay, yeah, we now come to new clause 15. I call Tim Farron to move new clause 15.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to be brief, I promise. This is an amendment which is based on the fact that we seriously approve of the approach the government is proposing to monitoring. We obviously want the regulatory bodies to be well equipped and resourced to be able to hold water companies and indeed other potential polluters to account. But there's a very clear decision that the government has made, which I totally approve of, to kind of lionise, to put front and centre citizen science and voluntary groups right around the country. We think about the Windrush against sewage pollution. I think about Save Windermere, my own constituency, Save the River Kent, Clean Up the River Kent group, and the Rivers Trusts in Eden and South Lakeland. These are wonderful people, pretty much all of them acting completely in a voluntary capacity, containing lots of incredibly clever, bright people, loads of people passionate about our environment. And given that the government is doing a thing that we approve of by seeking to deploy, mobilise these people in their communities, this amendment is about trying to make sure that we equip them, that we underpin what they're doing, that we provide some resource to support them, and that the government uses some resource to proactively go and look to fill in the gaps as well. So we're simply saying we approve of the mobilisation of citizen science right across the country to hold water companies to account by use of the real-time database, a variety of other tools as well. But if you're going to rely on a group of people, support them. And so we would seek to push this to a vote because we think this is a key central part of what this bill ought to be aiming to achieve.
Science.
The question is that new clause 15 be read a second time. Minister.
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for tabling new clause 15, and we fully support greater involvement of citizen scientists to hold water companies to account. And I use this opportunity to say thank you to them all for all of the work that they have done in this area up and down our country. Local people know their rivers best, and their campaigns on pollution issues have been crucial in bringing the scale of the issues to light. This bill already includes several amendments to support transparency to make it easier to scrutinise water companies. Clause 2 will enable the public to scrutinise the measures water companies are taking to reduce pollution incidents. Clause 3 will make information on discharges from emergency overflows available in near real time. This data, in addition to the near real-time information which is already available on storm overflow discharges, will be provided in a way that will enable citizens to identify trends and key issues. This will supplement the significant information that the Environment Agency already publishes. The Environment Agency also operates a 24-hour environmental incident hotline to enable the public to report incidents they observe in their local area. The Environment Agency shares the enthusiasm and values the expertise and local knowledge of citizen scientists. They have recently funded an internal project supporting citizen science, which will run until March 2024. And then welcome the Honourable Gentleman's approval for the government's work on this. I suppose the question is do we require primary legislation to continue doing something we are already doing successfully? This project, and with many others that are being supported by the government or the Environment Agency, is considering how to facilitate better engagement with citizen science going forward. The government believes, therefore, that these existing measures are all more effective for supporting citizen science than creating a fixed legislative duty on the Secretary of State, because we're already doing work in this area, and so we will not be supporting this amendment. Tim Farron.
I'm very grateful for the Minister's remarks. We do think that this being so central to the ethos really of this bill, that we would seek to mobilise thousands of people around the country. We should also be seeking to resource them to do so, and proactively seek to fill in the gaps where those gaps exist, so that every community has this level of scrutiny. So we would wish to present or propose that new clause 15 is put to the vote.
The question is that new clause 15 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no.
No.
No. Division! Lock the doors.
Dan Aldridge. Helena Dollimore.
No.
Tim Farron.
Aye.
Catherine Fuchs.
Oh, no.
Amanda Hack.
No.
Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr Neil Hudson.
No vote.
Jane Kirkham.
No.
Jerome Mayhew.
No vote.
Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffey. Andrew Pakes.
No.
Adrian Ramsey.
Aye.
David Reed.
No votes.
Jeff Smith.
No.
The ayes were 3, the noes were 11, so the noes have it. The noes have it. We now come to new clause 17. I call Tim Farron to move new clause 17.
Thank you. Water bill poverty is a reality, and also there are many people for whom water use is going to be greater because of a disability, because of age, because of a health condition. And whilst water shore benefits exist, they are patchy, and it is something of a postcode lottery. Which benefits a person may receive under water shore depends on your supplier, depends upon your catchment. Whether you qualify will depend upon which of the water companies you get your water from. We think that's not right. We think there should be a single social tariff, which is applicable and understandable for everyone. Postcode lottery should not be something which dictates whether or not you get the support that you may need, and which water company that you live under should not dictate whether you are able to afford your bill. Some water companies require 3 or 4 pieces of evidence, and some just a quick assessment of finances, with varying amounts of savings available, ranging from 15% to 90% off a bill. We would bring this under one simple tariff. We've certainly heard MPs on the government side regularly talk about the value and the importance of this. We simply want to put this on the face of the bill. We think a unified and a universal social tariff is about basic social justice, and in order to help those people for whom paying water bills is most difficult for a variety of reasons, so financial reasons, but also health and disability reasons also. I feel this is something the government should accept, or else we would seek to put this to a vote.
Introduction of single social tariff.
The question is that new clause 17 be read a second time. Minister.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for tabling new clause 17. It is clear that consumers are concerned about their bills, and of course this government wants to do everything it can to help and support people who are struggling, particularly as water bills are due to rise following Ofwat's final determinations. While this government does not consider it suitable to adopt this new clause at this moment in time, we will continue to consider all measures available to best support vulnerable customers, and we're exploring options to improve social tariff arrangements, to improve fairness and consistency in who is eligible to support and in the levels of assistance provided. There are already customer assistance schemes in place, such as WaterSure, which caps water and sewerage bills for vulnerable customers who have the higher essential water use requirement for family or health reasons. Under this scheme, £66 million of support was provided to 230,000 households in 23-24, with an average bill discount of £286. This sits alongside debt measures, water efficiency measures and company social tariffs, which are all targeted at supporting customers struggling to pay. Company social tariffs, which water companies design themselves and offer to customers struggling to afford their water bills, are forecast to provide an average of £640 million a year of support between 25 to 30. Prior to the introduction of any new support scheme, an in-depth research and analysis must be completed to ensure a properly designed policy. Therefore, this government is continuing to work with water industry to explore options to improve affordability arrangements, including holding the sector accountable for their public commitment to end water poverty by 2030. For this reason, I ask the Honourable Member to withdraw new clause 17.
Tim Farron.
I very much thank the Minister for her reply. But an in-depth analysis is not going to tell us anything other than the fact that there is massive inconsistency across the country. And of course, WaterSure provides benefits, but it's different where you live. You live in Yorkshire Water area, you live in United Utilities, Northumbria Water area. The benefits that you may receive will differ, and indeed the criteria on which you would qualify also differs. That means there are some people in poverty, some people with serious disabilities or health needs and therefore have higher water usage requirements, who will be hit by higher bills simply because of a lack of a single social tariff. We think this is important to social justice and helping those most in need in our communities, and therefore we think this is a very important one to put to the vote.
The question is that new clause 17 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
No. Division! Lock the doors.
Dan Aldridge.
No.
Helen Dollimore.
No.
Tim Farron.
Aye.
Catherine Fuchs.
No.
Amanda Hack.
No.
Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr Neil Hudson.
No vote.
Jane Kirkland. Jerome Mayhew.
No vote.
Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffy.
No.
Andrew Pakes.
No.
Adrian Ramsey.
Aye.
David Reed.
No vote.
Jeff Smith.
No.
The ayes were 3, the noes were 11. So the noes have it, the noes have it. We now come to new clause 19, which will be convenient to debate with new clause 23. I call Tim Farron to move new clause 19. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to focus here first on NC 19, and there are 3 parts to it, and I'm going to cover through one part very quickly, which is 2DZA, which essentially is ensuring the financial stability of water or sewerage undertakers. I think we've discussed that at length in NC4, so I'm not going to rehash that in any details. I think we all know each other's views. However, 2DZB, there's A and there's B. A is a prohibition on water or sewerage undertakers having offshore holding companies. Now, why does a UK regulated water company need an offshore holding company? I mean, maybe to dodge some tax, maybe to make it as untransparent as possible. And what I'd really like is a straight answer as to why we're not going to kill this off today when discussing this. Do we really need to push this out another 6, maybe 12, maybe 24 months, maybe never with the Water Commission? I don't know. I think we could just find our way, each of us, to actually say offshore holding companies are not good for our rivers, for our citizens, or for our country. And I really hope we get there. Okay, now, it's getting a bit late, but there is something that I'd really like you to engage your brains on, which is a difficult, complicated subject, but it's the key to understanding what's going wrong with our water companies. It's called regulated capital value. Yeah? So, what's in that B? It says a requirement that regulated capital value for each undertaker is annually reconciled against the market values of the undertaker's equity and debt. So what on earth is regulated capital value? So the key thing to really remember about this is this decides how much money the water companies make. Yeah? So therefore, if you're a water company, bigger regulated capital value, good. Yeah? Now, the bizarre thing is that regulated capital value was really a proxy for enterprise value, which basically means the equity value of the company, what the shareholders' value of the company is worth, plus the debt, the net debt. And that was set up, and this is really one of the original sins, that was set up back in the mists of time, around 1989 and beyond, when the company was originally privatised. And it has been carried forward every year, where it's just like, take last year's, add a bit for inflation, add a bit for capex, never, never, never reconcile it with reality. Okay? And that's what has gone on for decades. So now we've got this thing called regulated capital value, which is the absolutely critical thing which the water utility companies are focused on in terms of this is how we make money. So we want that number as big as possible. So what we are advocating here is let's take that apart, because the reality on the ground is that the equity, and I'm going to take Thames Water as my usual guinea pig, many of Thames Water's equity shareholders have declared that their holding in Thames Water has no value. Yeah, so that's OMERS, that's University Superannuation Trust. I think the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority might have done it as well. So they said our equity is toast, it's written off. Yeah, and then the debt is not that hard to calculate either, because you can just look at what it's trading, because these are bonds, and you can see what discounts they're trading at, and you can add that up, put them together, and you've got a number much smaller than what is the regulated capital value of Thames Water today. But if you're a water company or if you're Ofwat, let's just put a big pair of mufflers on and ignore that fact, because it's safer to be in kind of fancy land. And this matters, because if this is the case, it's unreasonable to expect the consumers are paying prices that are artificially inflated purely to compensate investors, whether they're debt or equity investors, for the cost of their poor historic decisions. And I believe what Ofwat has just done by sticking a 35% price rise to all of our customers in the Thames Water catchment is that they have basically bailed out, or are attempting to bail out, the existing shareholders, and particularly the lenders, to Thames Water. And I think that's wrong. And I think we should be doing everything we can in our power to stop it. So with regard to RCV, it's ridiculous that we're relying on the concept of RCV, which is founded on calculations done over 30 years ago and bears no relation to reality and is never reconciled against a company's balance sheets. 1. 2. The continued use of an inflated RCV works the advantage of investors and lenders at the expense of consumers, bill payers, and enables lenders to avoid the economic consequences of their poor lending decisions. In crude terms, consumers are bailing out the banks. I sincerely doubt that the balance sheet strength of the water companies, as the asset lives are entirely unrealistic, but they have enabled water companies to claim sufficient financial strength to be able to pay excessive dividends and management bonuses. Now, I'm also going to highlight something which I'm really keen just to, and again, you're going to, I feel a little bit sorry to bring this on you, but I'm going to do it, which is, if you look at the asset depreciation rates of these water companies, they are the biggest I've ever seen in 25 years of finance. So if you have a wastewater network asset, and you might immediately think of Bazalgette's great big pipe that he built 150 years ago, no, well, that's pretty good for purpose. No, that maybe you don't need to depreciate that over more than 150 years. If you think about places in my patch, Aston, Standlake, where you put in pipes 30, 50, 70 years ago, and they are leaking hand over fist. We've got 500,000 hours of sewage dumping, and yet you know what the depreciation rate on that asset is? It's not 20 years. It's not 30 years. It's not 40 years. It's not 50 years. It's 150 years. Yes.
I'm grateful for permission to intervene, and this is a really genuinely interesting point. I know it's late, but I'd be grateful if the member could expand further detail, because whilst he's referencing regulated capital value and the difference between what's on the sheet and what's in reality, could he explain, for the benefit of the committee, in a bit more detail what that means in reality? If there were to be a rebase of regulated capital value, what would be the practical impact of that?
I really question what value, regulated capital value, given how completely out of whack it is with reality, is bringing to the table. So I don't have all the answers on this, but I really question whether this has got any utility to the conversation, because what's happening here is we've got a business generating at the moment 1.2 billion of cash flows, and it's got these enormous balance sheet and this enormous regulated capital value, and because of those essentially false premises, because we don't actually have assets of that value, I believe, regulated capital value is essentially figment. So we're grappling with things which have no basis. And I think we would do well to first of all reconcile and look at the facts, try to look at what these assets are actually worth, and then build out from there.
Again, one possible reason why regulated capital value is important is because bills are assessed as being reasonable or not in relation, in part at least, to the return, what is considered to be a reasonable return on capital. So if your regulated capital value has depreciated to zero, then does the member agree with me that the knock-on impact on what is a reasonable bill to take account of the debt and the capital investment might be adversely affected? Does he think that might be something to do with it?
I mean, the whole thing is reverse engineered. So I'm completely in agreement on that, and that I don't think is necessary or useful to where we're getting to, and I think that's causing a lot of the trouble. So I would like to find a way, and I would really recommend the Water Commission digs into this to find a way out of that. And I'd also, I'm on the Business and Trade Select Committee, and I'll be asking the Financial Reporting Council to be looking, which oversees the accounting body, to be asking these accounting firms whether this is actually a valid, whether those numbers, those incredibly slow depreciation periods of 150 years, they actually think are valid, and if so, why? Okay, so, sorry, please.
I'm grateful for further intervention, this time on 2DZB, little a rather, which is the prohibition of water and sewage undertakers having offshore holding companies. The honourable member in his speech made reference to some of the international investors who hold holdings in Thames Water and perhaps the majority of the other water companies. The access to international markets is very important for raising investment into our water utilities. Does he accept that using offshore holding companies might be a mechanism that allows for easier transfer of funds and easier investment and easier access to international finance? And for that purpose, it may have a benign rationale rather than one that is, we always assume that offshore holding companies are somehow suspicious, or that their motivation is tax avoidance. And I believe that the honourable gentleman made reference to that in his earlier comments. And that might be the case, in which case they should not be encouraged. But with his experience of 25 years in finance, which he's already made reference to, is there an argument for offshore holding companies making easier access for international investment?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I've got one here from Thames Water Utilities Cayman Finance Holdings Limited. I mean, why Cayman? Yeah, I mean, easier access. I mean, it just, to me, you know, if I say Cayman, you say tax haven, you know, this is why it's there. And I think we should be doing our best to stop that. And last I looked, London still was a financial capital and you could still raise equity and debt in this country, and I sincerely hope that remains the case. So I don't see a good reason to have holding companies offshore. So that was all I wanted to say. You might be happy to hear on NC19. NC23 is also being considered in this tranche, and I'm just going to jump to that, and I'm going to highlight 2DZB small b. I'm just going to read it out, which is just trying to link one thing, which is set out a process for agreeing capital expenditure necessary for service improvements, bill increases and changes to operating costs while the undertaker is subject to special administration regime. We have got a huge amount of money to spend on our water utility companies because they haven't been spending enough over the last decade or two. And when a special administrator has been appointed in these instances, the goal of this is to ensure that the special administrator is taking that future spend into account when they are considering how much debt needs to be cut. Because what we don't want to have is come out of special administration with still very high debt, which disables them from being able to then make the necessary investments that will be required over the next 1, 3, 5, 10, 15 years to get our water company back into shape. So that's the goal of it.
Ofwat responsibility for the financial stability of water companies.
The question is that new clause 19 be read a second time. Minister.
Thank you, and I thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for the intent behind new clause 19, and as highlighted, it seems contradictory in parts to new clause 18, also tabled in his name. It is important to highlight to the House that Ofwat already has a core duty under Section 2 of the Water Industry Act 1991 to ensure water companies are able to finance the proper carrying out of their statutory obligations. Ofwat already monitors information they receive about companies and the financial positions on an ongoing basis. This includes carrying out detailed review of the financial information published by companies in the annual performance reports, statutory accounts, interim accounts, investor reports and other sources. Ofwat also directly engages with companies where they see an increased level of risk. Additionally, Ofwat has recently updated water company licences to require them to take account of service delivery for customers and the environment, as well as financial resilience when deciding whether to pay a dividend. More broadly, the Independent Commission into the Water Industry will look at long-term, wider reform of the water sector, as I have already mentioned. Company financial structures are one of the number of areas which could be explored under the Commission, and we do not want to preempt the outcome of the Commission through this amendment. The former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, John Cunliffe, chairs the Commission. He has, as mentioned, decades of financial, investor and regulatory experience. His appointment demonstrates the government's ambition to fix the foundations of the industry. And as I have mentioned previously as well, there will be a call for evidence, and the Honourable Member will be able to make his points to Sir John Cunliffe and to the Commission. Given the existing monitoring of the financial resilience of the sector and the forthcoming recommendations of the Independent Commission, we do not believe this amendment is appropriate. I therefore ask him to withdraw it. Turning to new clause 23, also tabled by the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale. A special administration regime enables a company which provides vital public services, water, energy, rail, to be put into administration in certain circumstances to ensure that the public service will continue to be provided pending rescue via a means such as debt restructuring or transfer via a sale to new owners. There is no need for a company exiting a SAR to be placed under an enhanced regime regarding its debt levels. Water companies are allowed to raise debt to fund the delivery of their services, and it is for companies to decide their financial structure. However, I will resist the urge to repeat my previous comments about the Water Commission looking at the financial structures of all of the water companies, and hopefully we'll take that as made, as previously outlined. In relation to capital expenditure during a site, it is not necessary to establish a statutory process for agreeing this expenditure, as this would be agreed under a court-appointed special administrator in the lead-up to a SAR. Government can provide funding support to the special administrator. Any company, a STAR, will still be subjected to the same regulatory regime and be expected to meet its statutory obligations. Therefore, I hope the Honourable Member understands why we cannot accept his amendments, but I repeat the offer made. The Honourable Member will be able to talk to Sir John Cunliffe and present the evidence that he's just presented to the committee to him to consider as part of the wider evidence gathering. And therefore, I ask the Honourable Member to withdraw them. Tim Farron.
Thank you, Chair. Thank the Minister for her response. I think it's very kind of the Minister to have so much faith and be so charitable towards Ofwat, given its record over the last decade or two, particularly with regard to its management of the financials of the water companies. And we will withdraw NC 23, but we would like to call a vote, please, on NC 19.
The question is that new clause 19 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. We know what's happening next. Lock the doors. Division.
Dan Aldridge. No. Eleanor Donoghue. No. Tim Farron. Aye. Catherine Fuchs. No. Amanda Hack. No. Emma Harding. No. Tom Hayes. No. Claire Hazelgrove. No. Dr. Neil Hudson.
No vote.
Jane Kirkham. No. Jerome Mayhew.
No vote.
Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffy.
No.
Andrew Pakes. No. Adrian Ramsey. Aye. David Reed.
No votes.
Jeff Smith.
No.
The ayes were 3, the noes were 11, so the noes have it, the noes have it. And 23 will come to very soon, actually. So new course 20 has already been debated, hasn't it? So, Tim Farron, would you like to move this one formally?
I would like to move that formally, yes.
Okay, so the question is that new clause 20 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Division! Lock the doors.
Dan Aldridge.
No.
Eleanor Donoghue. No. Tim Farron.
Aye.
Catherine Fuchs.
No.
Amanda Hack.
No.
Emma Hardy.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Claire Hazelgrove.
No.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
No vote.
Jake Kirkham.
No.
Jerome Mayhew.
No vote.
Charlie Maynard.
Aye.
Darren Paffy.
No.
Andrew Pakes.
No.
Adrian Ramsey.
Aye.
David Reed.
No votes.
Jeff Smith.
No.
The ayes were 3, the noes, this is getting a little repetitive, were 11. So the noes have it, the noes have it. New clause 21, oh this is brand new, is it? Okay, we now come to new clause 21, with which it will be convenient to debate new clause 29. Charlie Maynard.
I'll be brief. So 21, this is really something which we would ask to be considered, and we just want to highlight here, which is the 5-year price review. I mean, and the 5-year shoehorning of that time period. You know, it might have worked for Lenin, maybe not. We don't think it works well in the water sector. And what we are looking for is seeing whether we can release ourselves from that. Because in certain situations, and we'll come to NC 35 later, we believe that we are all better off if we are looking over a longer time period, because we've got some really big problems and we need to be reducing those problems over not just the next 5 years and just thinking about that, but over a 10 or a 15-year period, and working towards some really big fixes over a longer period. And so if we're just always locked into these 5-year cycles, I don't think we're serving ourselves well. That's really the point of NC 21. NC 29, and I'll just read out a bit. the end bit, 171A, at the end of that paragraph, the authority must have regard to the performance of the relevant undertaker or undertakers against pollution targets across the previous 5 years. So at the moment, how our companies do is not really very well linked to their reward. And at the moment, I think everybody is thinking with water companies, certainly I am most of the time, about sticks, not carrots. But I think actually we ought to be thinking a little bit about carrots as well as sticks, because if companies are let's say we do ultimately do good things like set pollution reduction targets, then if they actually beat those pollution reduction targets, maybe we should be working towards a solution where they actually do well out of that. They actually have a carrot where they are rewarded for doing well, as opposed to it's endlessly a stick. So that's the point of NC 29. We're not pushing either of them to a vote, and I'll leave it at that.
Review of price review process.
The question is the new clause 21 second time. Minister.
Thank you, and I will speak first to new clause 21 and then to new clause 29. And I thank the Honourable Member again for the intention behind this clause. The water sector is facing multiple challenges and growing pressures. Resolving these will require transformatory change, and the Government agrees that it is crucial that we conduct a fundamental review of the water industry regulatory system. We want to ensure that we have a system that supports strategic planning and investment with fairness to customers and environmental improvement at its core. I would like to reassure the Honourable Gentleman that such a review is already underway. I feel I might have mentioned it once or twice before, through the independent commission led by Sir John Cunliffe. This comprehensive review is addressing the three elements this new clause raises: planning, financing and investment. And this is taking a holistic approach to assessing the system. It will make recommendations to ensure that the water sector is better equipped to ensure clean rivers, lakes and seas and a sustainable water supply for the future. The Commission will report to Government by Q2 25 ahead of the recommended time frame in this amendment. It's been a long day. I trust that the Honourable Member is reassured the requirements of this clause are already being addressed through the work of the Independent Commission. Turning next to new clause 29, also tabled by the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale. I would like to reassure the Honourable Member that the Government is fully aware of the scale of the damage pollution is causing to our waterways, and we're committed to working with the water industry regulators to address this. As a regulator, Ofwat has a range of primary duties, including to ensure that companies properly carry out their functions and ensure that companies are able to finance the delivery of their statutory obligations, including environmental obligations. Ofwat set the total spending envelope for companies through their price review process and review company business plans to ensure compliance with statutory obligations. I am pleased to inform the House that Ofwat published their final determinations for Price Review 24 on the 19th of December, which include a confirmed £104 billion worth of expenditure over the next 5 years. This is the highest level of investment in the water sector since privatisation and will fund reducing the number of spills from storm overflows by 45% by upgrading 2,800 storm overflows. In addition, companies will improve river water quality by improving over 1,700 wastewater treatment works. Furthermore, Ofwat has increased the number of outcome delivery incentives against which companies must deliver, including targets on reducing serious pollution incidents, the reduce of storm overflows and operational greenhouse gas emissions. This means that serious pollution incidents will lead to clear and robust financial penalties for companies. I trust the Honourable Member is therefore reassured his amendment is not required as pollution targets are already closely factored into the current price review model. I ask the Honourable Member to withdraw his amendments.
Charlie Maynard.
As mentioned, we will not be pushing these to a vote.
Does anyone object to new clause 21, please? New clause 21 by leave. We now come to new clause 22. Charlie, again.
Thank you. We've covered this very well, so I'll be very, very brief. So I'm going to just highlight Error 3. The Special Administration Water Company may reduce the debts owed by the regulated entity to its creditors by up to 100%, taking into account the future forecast expenditure over the short, medium and long term and subject to the Administrator's confidence in the company's ability to accommodate this spending. We've already discussed this. I'm not going to go for it further. I'm not going to push for a vote. I'll leave it at that.
Prohibition on bailout of water company shareholders and creditors.
The question is the new clause 22 being read a second time. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for tabling new clause 22. And as mentioned, we have already had a debate on this issue, and I had hoped that we've made the situation quite clear about what a special administration regime is and what it isn't. But here we go again. I must reject the amendment because it would jeopardise the main purpose of the water special administration regime, which is the continued provision of vital public services. The role of a special administrator does not include a power to cancel debt, and the purpose of the administration is not to bail out water company creditors or shareholders. This amendment is therefore unnecessary. It would divert from long-established insolvency principles of treating creditors equally according to their rights as commercial entities. When a water company enters special administration, creditors are unable to enforce their debt repayments unless they seek leave of the court or receive permission from the special administrator. When a water company exits from special administration via either rescue, such as debt restructuring, or transfer, such as a sale, the special administrator determines the level of repayment to creditors. This will be calculated according to the statutory order of priority. It is very unlikely all debts would be repaid at the end of a special administration because of the order payments are required to be made in. Debts can only be cancelled according to a restructuring plan or under court supervision. The government does not directly or indirectly make any decisions relating to the exact quantity of debt recouped by creditors or equity recouped by shareholders. I must reject this amendment as the changes we are making align the water industry special administration regime with other regimes in other sectors. It is not our intention to alter the regime's relationship with the existing framework of insolvency legislation.
Charlie Maynard.
I'm not going to push it to a vote.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does anyone object to new clause 22 being withdrawn? New clause 22 by leave withdrawn. New clause 23 gone. Okay. 25 gone. 26. We now come to new clause 26. I call Tim Farron. Or is it? Are we not wanting to go on to
23 and 25.
Yeah. I don't know if people.
We don't want to push them.
Oh, you're not.
You don't.
Skip over it, I'm being told. Yeah, we've had the debate, and if there's no vote, it's a bit.
Either 23 or 25 to the vote. So.
Yeah, superfluous. Okay. We now come to new clause 26. I call Tim Farron to move new clause 26.
I will do so. This is an amendment which we. Well, I don't really want to push it to a vote, but it's on here because this was the amendment that my noble friends chose to withdraw in the Lords, having been given assurances by the noble Baroness Heyman, and to whom, for whom I've got enormous respect and think very highly of her. This is an amendment that would seek to ban bonuses for senior company executives if they had been found guilty of a Category 1 or 2 discharge, and it prevents any loopholes to enable bonuses to be paid under those circumstances, such as pay rises, share options, and what have you. So I'm just going to quote, with permission, what Baroness Heyman said from the dispatch box in the other place, and I quote, "However, we are very aware that water companies need to attract investment, so as outlined in Ofwat's consultation, the circumstances under which performance-related pay bans are being proposed represent very serious failures by a company. I reassure the noble Baroness, my noble friend Lady Bakewell of Hardington Mandeville, that this includes instances of criminal convictions, credit ratings falling below investment grade, and Ofwat's proposed metric for bonuses to be prohibited if a company has had a serious Category 1 or 2 pollution incident in the preceding calendar year." She then goes on to say, "I would like to be clear with all noble lords that we are not asking companies to meet any higher or new standard than that which is already expected of them." Given this assurance, which we were really grateful for, but the fact that nothing of this sort has appeared on the face of the bill since, I just asked the Minister to give me some reassurance as to why we shouldn't push this to a vote, given that I don't see in writing any anything further to give us confidence other than the Noble Baroness's words.
About performance-related pay.
The question is that new clause 26 be read a second time. Minister.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for his amendment, new clause 26. The Government agrees that we need to rebuild trust in the water sector and that executives should be firmly held to account for serious failures by companies to meet environmental standards. This is why, through clause 1 of this bill, we are giving Ofwat new powers to issue rules on remuneration and governance. The legislation requires that Ofwat must set rules that make the payment of bonuses contingent on companies achieving high environmental standards. As the independent regulator, it is more appropriate for Ofwat to determine the performance metrics to be applied when setting the rules for performance-related pay. As outlined in the initial policy consultation, Ofwat are currently considering prohibiting bonuses if a company has had a serious Category 1 or 2 pollution incident in the preceding calendar year. This is not on the face of the bill, however, it is very clearly in Ofwat's consultation that they would prohibit they are looking to consult and prohibit bonuses for a Category 1 or 2 pollution incident, as my noble friend outlined. This provides an early indication of direction of travel on the environment metric. Ofwat will be able to use their direction-giving power and wider enforcement framework to hold companies to account where they have reason to believe they are in breach of the rules. However, banning bonuses, even in the cases of unwanted but legal spills, would effectively ban bonuses for all companies. This could unnecessarily threaten the sector's ability to attract and retain talent. And I refer the Honourable Gentleman back to the consultation that Ofwat has launched to see for himself the pollution metric I just mentioned. On this basis, I hope the Honourable Member feels able to withdraw his amendment.
Tim Farron.
Thanks, Dr Hook. So I am obviously reassured to a large degree by what the Minister says, but I am concerned that it is not on the face of the bill. Simply giving handing this over to Ofwat, given their track record, doesn't feel like something that fills me with enormous amounts of confidence in them. We will reserve our position on this one, and therefore, as in potentially talk about it further at report stage, but at this point we will not push this to a vote.
New clause 26 by leave withdrawn.
I beg to move that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned.
The question is that further consideration of this bill now be adjourned. As many of those who are of that opinion say aye. 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 Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Sitting adjourned until 11:30 on Thursday in here. Order.